The wind howled like a dying beast across the empty plains, tearing hope from Mara Ellison's frozen lungs. She lay half buried in snow, arms wrapped tight around Caleb, her feverish child who hadn't spoken in hours. His breath came in shallow gasps, skin burning even as the storm tried to claim him. She whispered goodbye, a cracked promise lost to the screaming blizzard. Then, hoofbeats pounding like a heartbeat refusing to die. Out of the white veil came a lone rider. Tahu, a Navajo warrior, frost clinging to his hair, his coat heavy with snow. He dismounted, crouched beside them, eyes steady as stone, yet holding a mercy Mara had never known. He didn't ask her permission. He simply said, "I take both." And with that one choice, everything changed forever. The wind howled like a dying beast across the empty plains, clawing at every scrap of warmth left in Mara Ellison's bones. Snow stung her face, needles of ice driven sideways by the endless gusts. Her shawl, once a pale blue, was now a ragged strip frozen stiff against her shoulders. Each step through the drifting white took more than it gave, and still she did not stop. She couldn't. Pressed to her chest, half buried in the folds of her coat, Caleb burned with a fever that no storm could smother. She felt it, that heat like a coal against her skin, and she clung to it desperately because it was the only proof he was still alive. His breath came in shallow, broken rhythms. Sometimes his small hand twitched against her collarbone. Sometimes he murmured words she couldn't make out, a child's plea lost to the wind. They should have been safe by now. A week ago, she'd believed Dust Creek could be a place to begin again, a place to forget the debts her late husband left behind, the rumors, the hunger that clawed at her and her boy every winter since. But Dust Creek had teeth, and the man who'd sworn he'd keep her safe had shown them to her the moment the snow began to fall. His offer of shelter came with a price she would not pay, so she gathered Caleb in the night and fled into the teeth of the storm. "Hold on, baby," she whispered, her words snatched away as soon as they left her lips. "Just a little more. Just a little more." She said it for him, but more and more, it was for herself. Because each step felt like a betrayal. Her feet were numb, her calves cramped with the weight of trudging through drifts that swallowed her knees. She could taste blood where her lips had cracked. And in the back of her mind, something darker whispered that it would be easier to lay down in the snow. Just rest, just sleep, than fight a storm that cared nothing for prayers or promises. But Mara Ellison had never been one to die easy. Far across the frozen expanse, hidden beyond the swirling white, a lone rider guided his horse in a slow, deliberate arc. Tayu sat high in the saddle, wrapped in a thick buffalo hide, his long hair crusted with snow where the storm's fingers had combed it. His eyes were dark, narrowed against the sting of ice, but calm. The calm of someone who had learned long ago that panic in the cold would kill you quicker than the wind. He had seen the tracks hours before. A woman's boots, too small for this country, weaving like a drunk's line through the drifts. Smaller prints beside them, sometimes dragged. When the snow eased for a breath, he had spotted them. Two shapes, one wrapped around the other, moving slow enough for the storm to swallow them whole. Tahu remembered another storm like this one. He remembered how his uncle's voice had grown rough with frostbite, whispering stories into his ear to keep him from drifting off when the night got too black to see. He remembered the feel of that man's heartbeat under his cheek, a heartbeat that slowed, then stopped, as the snow rose around them like a grave. Tahu had lived because his uncle had died on his feet. The wind had buried him in silence, and the memory of that sacrifice had howled through Tahu's bones every winter since. He tugged at the horse's reins, bringing the beast to a halt on a low rise. Below him, through the blowing white, he could just make out the huddled shape of the woman, Mara, and the boy pressed tight to her chest. She stumbled, nearly went to her knees, then caught herself. Even now, the way she clutched the child made something old and jagged twist in Tahu's gut. He didn't ride closer yet. He watched the wind tug at the loose strands of her hair, the way her shoulders hunched like a battered animal, refusing to give in. He knew what the storm would do, knew she wouldn't make it another mile. But he also knew mercy was a thing you gave carefully in a land that punished softness. The horse shifted under him, snorting steam into the frozen air. Toe patted its neck, eyes never leaving the mother and child. Somewhere deep in the hush of his memory, he heard his uncle's voice, sharp as flint. When the wind comes for them, stand in its path if you can. And so he nudged the horse forward, snow swirling like ghost white claws around their legs. Tonight he would stand, and they would live. When Mara Ellison opened her eyes, the first thing she felt was the warmth. Not the fragile warmth of a dying body pressed to hers in the snow, but a steady, living heat that reached into her bones. For one fleeting second, she almost let herself believe she'd dreamed the blizzard, that she'd wake to her old cabin, the scent of firewood and coffee, Caleb sleeping soundly in his cot. But when she tried to move, pain reminded her she hadn't dreamed any of it. Her arms ached from holding her son too long, her shoulders raw, where the cold had bitten deep. The glow of the fire danced on the cave walls, rough stone and patches of frozen moss. She smelled smoke, pine sap, and something sharp, like herbs crushed under a boot. And there, the small bundle by her side, Caleb. His cheek rested against her chest, mouth slightly open, breath warm but ragged. His forehead still burned under her palm, but the trembling had eased. For now, she let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. But the fear lingered, a sour knot in her gut. Don't you dare leave me, she thought, pressing a dry kiss to his hair. Don't you dare. Beyond the fire she saw him, the man from the storm, Tahu. He crouched near the flames, rolling dried leaves between his palms and dropping them into a clay pot propped on a flat rock. Steam curled up into the cold air, mixing with the faint hiss of wind that found its way through cracks in the stone. He didn't look at her right away. His eyes stayed on the fire, on the steady swirl of the mixture he tended. The quiet between them settled like snow, heavy, muffling everything but the snap of pine pitch in the flames. Mara shifted, her movement echoing off the cave walls. Her voice cracked like ice. Where are we? Tahu's head tilted, just enough to show he'd heard. Shelter, he said, voice low, deep like river rock. Not far from where you fell. Fell. She hated the word, hated how it made her feel smaller than the walls pressing in. She pulled Caleb closer, though the boy didn't stir. Why did you bring us here? She asked, her words sharper now. You could have kept riding. Let the storm do its work. Tahu didn't flinch. He stirred the pot once, twice. I've seen enough graves under the snow. Mara snorted, bitterness crawling up her throat. You think you're saving me? Us? She let out a ragged laugh. I didn't ask for your mercy. His dark eyes flicked to her then. Not cold, but ancient somehow. He studied her for a heartbeat, then dropped his gaze back to the brew. Doesn't matter what you asked for, he said simply. She hated him for that calm, unyielding tone, like the mountain itself had spoken. She wanted him to shout, to tell her she owed him, to demand gratitude she could spit back in his face. That at least would have made sense. You don't know me, she bit out. You don't know what people like me do to people like you. Tahu's hand stilled. For a moment, Mara thought she'd won, that she'd broken through that mask of calm. But when he spoke, his words landed heavier than any insult. Years ago, I found a wagon turned on its side by the river, he said, eyes fixed on the dancing flame. A man, his wife, 2 children. The horses had run, food gone, snow coming fast. They would have died that night. Mara's throat tightened. She didn't want to hear this, but she couldn't stop herself. What did you do? I helped, Tahu said. He leaned back on his haunches, voice low. I gave them my horse, walked beside them 3 days through the pass, brought them to Mercy Ford. Mara knew that name, a town that prided itself on law, yet turned its face when it suited them. They thanked me, Tahu said, his tone so flat it made her shiver more than the cold. They took my hand, called me brother. His lips pressed thin. That night, they waited until I slept, bound my hands, took what I had left me on the trail for wolves. He finally looked at her, and for the first time, Mara saw something raw behind those dark eyes. Not anger, but a weariness she knew in her own bones. I don't need your thanks, Mara Ellison. I need that boy to breathe come morning. The flames popped, scattering sparks that faded before they hit stone. Mara felt her pride clawing for purchase, the instinct to pull Caleb closer, to spit that she could do this on her own. But she couldn't. She knew it in the hollow of her chest, in the dull ache in her spine, in the way her son's small body curled so trustingly against her ribs. Slowly, she looked down at Caleb's flushed face, then back at the warrior who had no reason to stay, yet had stayed all the same. "I didn't ask for your mercy," she whispered, "but I won't waste it." Tahu nodded once. Nothing more. He turned back to his work, crushing another handful of herbs with a quiet patience that made the storm outside feel like a faraway dream. And in that hush, Mara felt the faintest crack open in the wall she'd built around her heart. The first warmth that wasn't from the fire, but from the chance, however small, that maybe tomorrow would come. When Mara Ellison woke, the first thing she felt was the ache in her bones, the sharp reminder that she was still here. The second was warmth. Real warmth, not the false heat of Caleb's fever. A fire burned somewhere close. She could hear it snapping in the hush. For a moment, she let her eyes stay closed, afraid that if she looked, it would all be gone. The storm would be back, the wind clawing her apart again. But Caleb shifted against her ribs, a fragile breath. She forced her eyes open. The cave's ceiling rose low above her head, ridges of stone wet with melting frost. Shadows danced over the walls, flickers of flame, moving slow and steady like a heartbeat that refused to die. Her boy lay pressed to her chest, his skin still too warm, but his breathing softer than before. She brushed her hand over his hair. Her fingers trembled at the simple, impossible truth. He was alive. A shape moved near the fire. Mara squinted. The man, Tahu, crouched low on his heels, feeding a bundle of herbs into a battered pot perched over the coals. Steam coiled up, bitter and sharp. She caught the scent of willow bark, mint, something stronger she didn't know the name of. When she shifted, the fur under her rustled. The sound made Tahu glance over his shoulder. Their eyes met, hers wary, his unblinking, like stone turned warm by sun. "You should drink," he said, voice rough but calm. "You'll need your strength." She ignored the cup he nudged toward her. Her throat felt like sand, but her pride felt worse. She pulled Caleb closer, as if she could will her boy back to the way he'd been before Dust Creek, before promises turned to chains. "You didn't have to bring us here," she said, her words brittle, her lips cracked. "I didn't ask you to." Tahu turned back to the pot, stirring slow. The steam rose between them, an invisible wall that felt safer than the truth. "No one asked the snow to come," he said. "No one asked to be lost." Mara bristled. "You think you're better than them? The ones in Dust Creek?" Tahu's jaw tightened, the first sign of tension she'd seen in him since he'd carried her out of the storm. He set down the ladle, fingers curling against his knee. "I don't care who is better," he said. "I care who breathes come morning." Mara wanted to spit something sharp back, but her gaze fell to Caleb's face. The boy stirred, murmuring in his sleep. She pressed her lips to his forehead, fighting the knot in her throat. "What is that?" she asked, nodding to the pot. "Anything to look away." "Willow for the fever," Tahu said. "Mint for the lungs. My mother taught me." He hesitated, then added quieter. "My uncle would have done the same." A memory flickered in his eyes, a shadow darker than the cave's walls. He didn't seem to speak to her so much as to the fire itself. He was strong. He'd tell me, "When the snow comes, you stay awake. If you sleep, you don't wake up." We got caught in the past one winter. Too much wind, no trail left to follow. He wrapped me in his coat, gave me his warmth, and when the storm lifted, only I was breathing. He didn't say more, but the silence that followed felt like it belonged to the blizzard still howling in both their chests. Mara heard the echo of something she didn't want to name. The cost of mercy, the price of survival. She glanced up, voice raw. "Why us?" Tahu's eyes met hers, calm but fierce. "Because mercy does not ask what color your skin is." His words landed between them like an ember that refused to die. Mara's mouth opened, then shut again. Her mind strained to hold the last scraps of pride, of the Dust Creek voice that hissed, "Don't trust him." He's not your kind. But the wind outside had buried that voice deeper than the snow. In that hush, the boy sighed in his sleep. Tahu added more herbs to the pot, movements slow, as if he knew the past couldn't be undone, but could be answered for, one small act at a time. Somewhere beyond the storm, the plains waited. Mara knew the world outside still wanted her and her boy dead or broken. But here, in this hidden hollow of stone, there was breath. There was fire. There was a man who hadn't looked at her with hunger or pity, only the same steady watch that kept the ghosts at bay. Many families on the frontier had stories like this, whispers the history books never wrote down. A stranger who should have been an enemy, a blizzard that should have been a grave, and a single moment where trust cracked the ice between two worlds. Mara lay back, eyes never leaving the dark shape tending the fire. She felt the walls inside her shift, a tiny crack through which something warm and terrifying might grow. The first light of dawn spilled over the frozen plains, a cold blue wash that turned every drift into jagged teeth of ice. The storm had passed, but it left behind a silence that felt more dangerous than the howling wind ever had. Inside the cave, the fire had burned down to a low glow, just enough to hold the dark at bay. Mara sat with her back to the rough stone wall, Caleb curled into the hollow of her body, warm but still so small. She should have slept, but every time her eyelids drooped, her mind dragged her back to the snow. The weight of her boy in her arms, the sound of hoofbeats pounding like a heartbeat refusing to die. Now that heartbeat had become the soft crackle of embers and the quiet rhythm of Tahu's breathing on the other side of the fire. He sat cross-legged, sharpening his blade with the steady scrape of stone against steel. Mara watched him from beneath her lashes, taking in the dark hair that fell loose around his shoulders. The way his eyes never seemed to blink for long. There was something in that watchfulness that made her chest tighten, a strength that asked for nothing in return. She was about to whisper something, she didn't even know what, when she heard it, the faint crunch of snow under boots. Too heavy to be Tahu's, too careless to belong to a man who moved like the storm itself. Her heart stumbled. Tahu stilled, head turning just enough for their eyes to lock. "Stay here," he said, voice low. A stone rolled across the cave floor. Mara's arms tightened around Caleb, but her pride flared like a match in the dark. "Tahu!" But he was already moving, slipping to the cave mouth in a crouch that made him seem part of the rock itself. Mara strained to hear beyond the hush of her own pulse, and then she caught it, voices muffled but rising as they drew closer. Laughter edged with something sharper, like a knife tested on cloth before it met flesh. She eased Caleb onto the fur bedding, pressing a kiss to his temple. He stirred but didn't wake. Then she rose and crept to the cave's edge, close enough to see the smear of daylight beyond Tahu's shoulder. 4 men stood in the clearing, rifles slung carelessly over their shoulders. At their head was a figure Mara knew too well, the man who'd sworn she'd be safe in Dust Creek, who'd promised her shelter when the wind came howling. Jonah Reeve. He stood with his boots planted wide, breath fogging the air in short, eager puffs. He looked like the storm itself had carved him out. All sharp angles and cheap charm, but Mara knew how easily that charm turned to a fist. "Well, look what the snow dragged in," Jonah called, his grin flashing like broken teeth. His gaze slid from Tahu to the cave behind him. "Didn't take you long to find yourself a new blanket for the winter, did it, Mara?" Tahu didn't flinch. He just stood there, a wall of fur and bone, his knife still sheathed but close enough to matter. "You shouldn't be here," Mara said, stepping out from the shadow of the rock. Her voice felt too loud in the brittle dawn. "You have no right." Jonah's grin widened. "No right? Woman, you owe me. Dust Creek fed you, didn't it? Took your boy in when no one else would." Mara felt her hands curl into fists at her sides. "You fed us scraps and called it charity. Then you locked your doors when the snow came. If Tahu hadn't found us..." Jonah's eyes snapped to Tahu, narrowing like a snake sensing its final strike. "Him," he spat. "You're choosing him over your own people?" Tahu's voice cut the morning air like a blade drawn slow. "She chooses who stands when others run." Jonah barked a laugh. "Listen to that. The savage thinks he's a hero. You think she'll keep you around once she's warm again?" Mara stepped forward, planting herself at Tahu's side. Her voice shook, but it did not break. I'm choosing the one who didn't leave my child to die in the snow. For a heartbeat, the clearing held its breath. Jonah's grin faltered, eyes flicking to the other men, searching for the loyalty that had never truly been his. Behind Mara, Caleb let out a soft sigh in his sleep. The sound cracked through the brittle morning like a promise that the past would not bury them here. Tahu's hands settled near his knife. Jonah shifted back, the false smile curdling into something darker. The men behind him lowered their rifles, but only a fraction. In the hush before dawn fully claimed the world. Mara felt it, the last tether to Dust Creek snapping like old rope. Whatever happened next, she knew she was no one's to drag back ever again. When the sun finally rose over the white hills, the world felt too clean to belong to all the darkness they had left behind. The storm had stripped the plains raw, carving out every lie and betrayal until only the truth remained. The road back to Dust Creek was gone, and Mara Ellison did not mourn it. They stood at the mouth of the cave, the weak dawn light turning the frozen drifts into rivers of golden blue. Caleb leaned against Tahu's leg, the boy's small hand gripping a fold of his coat as if it were the last solid thing in a world still shifting beneath his feet. Mara watched her son, watched the faint color on his cheeks that hadn't been there 2 days ago. She let herself breathe, really breathe, for the first time since the storm had swallowed them. Tahu adjusted the blanket around Caleb's shoulders. He didn't look at Mara as he did it, but she felt the quiet promise in his hands. I won't let him fall. Not while I still stand. Mara shifted her pack across her back, what little she had managed to keep when she'd run from Dust Creek. A battered tin cup, a few matches wrapped in oilcloth, the comb her mother had given her before she left home for the last time. None of it weighed as much as the boy clinging to Tahu's side. She stepped forward, boots crunching through the crusted snow. Her fingers brushed Caleb's hair, then found Tahu's sleeve. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away. When he finally turned to her, the wind caught a loose strand of his black hair, whipping it across his face. Frost still clung to the ends like tiny stars. Where does it go? She asked, nodding at the pale, unbroken line of the hills beyond. The question tasted strange in her mouth, like hope she'd forgotten how to speak aloud. Tahu's eyes flicked across the open land. He shrugged, but there was no uncertainty in it. Somewhere the wind can't follow. She let out a low laugh. Small, but it warmed something brittle inside her chest. She reached down, scooped Caleb into her arms just long enough to feel the steady beat of his heart against hers. He was awake now, eyes clear but heavy, lashes dusted with sunlight. When she set him on his feet, he took Tahu's hand without a word. They started walking. No grand farewell, no final look over his shoulder. Behind them, the cave mouth yawned dark and empty, its secrets folded into the stone. Before them, the plains rolled on, blank, waiting, like a story yet to be carved into bark or stone. As they crested the first low ridge, Mara looked sideways at the man beside her. He had given her no sweet words, no promise of forever. Only a simple choice. I take both. And somehow that had been enough to rewrite the ending she'd once thought was carved in ice. Below the hill, the world stretched wide. There would be new storms, new hunger, but there would be breath, too. Fire when they needed it. A hand held out, not asking who deserved it. And in that hush before the day grew loud again, Mara Ellison knew the truth she would carry until her bones turned to dust. The road behind them was dead. The one ahead was theirs. Out here on the frontier, a single act of mercy could mean the difference between life and death. Mara and Tahu's story reminds us that sometimes it takes just one stranger's hand to change the road you thought you were trapped on forever. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How often do we, today, choose to stand in someone else's storm, even when it costs us comfort or pride? Maybe we don't fight blizzards or hunger on the open plains anymore, but we still fight loneliness, betrayal, and fear in ways that feel just as cold. It's easy to shut our doors, like the people of Dust Creek did, and tell ourselves we've done enough. But the truth is, kindness rarely asks what someone looks like, where they come from, or what they can give in return. It just stands, like Tahu did, between the storm and the ones who can't stand alone. Maybe you've lived long enough to see this in your own life. A neighbor who helped when no one else would. A friend who offered shelter when the world turned mean. Or maybe you've been that person for someone else. What do you think? Would you have trusted a stranger in the snow? Could you forgive betrayal if it meant saving a life? How far would you carry someone, even if the world called them not yours to save? Share your thoughts below, your stories, your questions. I'd love to read how this story touches you or what it reminds you of. Thank you for sitting by the fire with me for this tale. If you found something true in it, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share it with someone who still believes in simple acts of courage. I'll see you next time, where every story is another chance to stand in the storm for each other.